And welcome to Question Christianity, where tough questions get reasonable answers. At least that's our goal
Yeah,
here.
that's our hope.
So, if you're looking for a good conversation on weird Old Testament laws, you've come to the right spot tonight. We're continuing our discussion that's largely based on Paul Copan's Is God a Moral Monster?
Yep.
And we've had a few of these discussions previously. Don't feel like you have to see that to be a part of this conversation. If you're here, we'd love to have you hit us up in chat with your questions or comments in relation to the topic. And so that's about the only housekeeping we have. I'm Caleb Johnston, here to my right, leading us through this discussion tonight.
Charles Graves, glad to be here. Thank you.
And the one and only.
Hi, am I on? No, okay, I'm Pete. It says it right there, but that's Caleb.
Yeah.
Yep. All day.
All right. So let me start. So just to catch us up and maybe someone who's dropping in for the first time. So as you said, Paul Copan's book, we're looking at chapter 7. So if someone wants a deeper dive, I mean, certainly we're not gonna read the chapter. We're not even going to talk about everything in the chapter. We're just kind of discuss it. But if you want more details, then that's where our discussion is revolving around. Chapter 7, the Bible's ubiquitous weirdness, kosher foods and kooky laws. And this is part 1. And I think this is a very important chapter because he's going to, in the next chapter, talk very specifically about specific laws. But here, I think this is very enlightening because he tackles why in the heck these, without going to specifics, why laws like this would even exist. And I have to really sympathize with an unbeliever or an agnostic or a skeptic. It's like, if there's a God in the universe, right, the creator of the sun and the moon and all the worlds, what in the world does he care if you're mixing linen with cotton? What, like when you walk around on the earth, like why is that a law that a God, that all-knowing, all-creative, all-powerful, all-perfectly moral God would even have the tendency to do? I totally sympathize with that from frankly, from an ignorant, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, just a lack of understanding of what this is meant to be. So I totally sympathize with that. I'm actually hoping that there's people out there that are maybe like, yeah, what the heck is going on? Like, why kosher foods? Why would God care what you eat? I mean, maybe there could be some sympathy with some of the moral things. Like, I get the, thou shalt not kill thing, the adultery thing. Yeah, that kind of makes some sense. Don't steal. Don't eat shellfish. Like, even in the Old Testament, why is that a thing? So.
Right. No, I can sympathize, especially with this challenge as well, because we live, at least in this country, in a very biblically illiterate society. I mean, you can look at Barnard Pew research, and you can see that very few people read their Bible regularly. Even as a Christian, I'm guilty of not reading as much as I could be. And waste time on pointless activities instead. But that's a nationwide thing, at least in this country. And when you couple that with issues like the Old Testament laws, which are not necessarily simple issues to deal with, it's not like, oh, you just looked at the wrong translation, or it's more complex and nuanced in looking at these issues. So when you couple those two things together, the biblical illiteracy with really valid questions about Old Testament laws, it sets Christians up even for failure when in encountering these kind of challenges, because they're not necessarily the quick, easy answers that
Yeah, boy,
you
that's a
can get with
struggle,
some
isn't it?
other objections.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is always the battle that truth has with rhetoric. Is rhetoric is by definition are powerful and empathetic statements, and rationale often takes more time. It doesn't have clever rhetorical responses. It takes explanation, background, details, and that's always the battle. That tends to be the battle with Christianity itself. Is there's so many rhetorical attacks, and the responses. What we don't want to do is respond with rhetoric, but that means it's going to take time. And if someone's not willing to listen, well, oftentimes you could feel like you lost, so to speak, because you didn't have a nice quip to respond. Yeah, and the other side of that, or actually on the same side, is that now, in comparison with the people of the Old Testament, I mean, we live in a much more advanced civilization. We have science, we understand things. And I think it's just so easy, if you don't have the background understanding, to look at some of these weird and seemingly unexplainable things as something that just came up through some archaic religion or mysticism or black magic or something like that. And so you go, oh, it almost lends to the disbelievability when you have such weird laws. And a lot of these were laws. It's not like, hey, you should do this. It's like you can't do that. So I just want to steel man it before we dive into it. Any other thoughts, steel man? Okay. Well, Paul Copan starts the chapter. He says, imagine a triangle with the following categories. And I really like this. So if you have a triangle, and picture God at the top of the triangle, and then in the two bottom corners, you could have the land of Israel and the people of Israel. Or it might be said you have God, economic or land, and then social or people. And you have this triangle. And I really like that. And as he didn't say this, but I think he's basically implying, well, he didn't say it in so many words. But if you think about a triangle, if you ever try to change, you can't change one angle of a triangle without changing the triangle itself. You can't change one angle of a triangle without necessarily having to change the other angle, or at least one other angle, right? And that, I think that's at least a really good start as to understanding why God may be having some of these laws that affect just daily living. It's like you can't, the things you do in daily life, whether it be your theological, which might make sense, but even the economic or even the social, all have theological implications at the lowest and smallest level. So, well, they're intertwined, and you can't change one without changing the other. I once heard a pastor say in a sermon one time, and this is, it's not often that you hear something. I think we all have some, but it's got to be pretty memorable when you can remember something that a pastor said from like 20 years ago, and this was like 20 years ago. But he said, sin always has a greater circumference of effect than you plan it to be. You planned it to be this little tiny thing that you were just going to do on your own, and no one was going to know about it, and it always had you always pay more for it, and it has a wider circumference of effect than you ever planned. And that, I knew it to be true when I heard it, and I have found it to be true in experience ever since. It's like, you think you're just going to do this one thing, but this little thing that you did in private changed the way you thought, changed the way you treated people, changed how you related to God or didn't relate to God, your prayer, just everything there. It's all intertwined. There's almost nothing that we can do in true isolation, even from ourselves, let alone from the people we live around. So I think that's also an important understanding, as we just lay the bedrock here of why God might be involved in these day-to-day ritual laws. Any thoughts on that? Give you guys a chance to think. Okay.
No, I think you're on point there. And when we couple that with that kind of understanding, plus we take as many contextual clues as we can, that certainly helps give a well-rounded picture for this kind of issue.
So I heard talking about pastors that you heard say something a long time ago. I heard a pastor one time say, when you make Christ the Lord of your life, or when Christ becomes the Lord of your life, owner of your life, you as you are submitting to that lordship, you will over time realize he has ownership over every area of your life. Not just the areas that you comfortably want to make him owner of, and then you get to portion out this little piece over here. It's the entire life.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit, and I'm not saying that when you see, hey, don't wear two types of twine or two types of clothing woven together, or cloth woven together. I can't say that I fully always understand it, but I do understand that when God is Lord of your life, when Christ is Lord of your life, he is Lord of the whole life.
Yeah, he's either Lord of all of your life or he's not Lord at all. Of course, he is Lord at all, but it's like your recognition of that. So that's a really good point, Pete. The other point that kind of leads into that is one that you're basically implying is when we make Christ Lord of our life. Well, first of all, we want to acknowledge the fact that Christ is Lord of our life, whether or not we acknowledge it. I mean, from a Christian point of view, God is the creator and Lord of the universe, and he is Lord of everyone, whether they acknowledge it or not. But when we acknowledge that, we make that affirmation, we recognize Jesus as being Lord of our life and willingly submit to that. See, that's the thing. We willingly say, yes, I acknowledge, and you are Lord. You are Lord. You're Lord of everything. Although I don't like it sometimes, I think that's okay to say as a Christian. There's a lot of things sometimes I don't like that he's Lord of. That's just my flesh, my weakness in my flesh. But I intellectually acknowledge that he is Lord over everything, and this is a willing step on my part. And it was the same, and we've said this before in other parts previously, but Israel was not like hogtied and dragged in unwillingly to be God's people. Now, God chose Israel. That was the election part of God's decision. But Israel then, willingly obliged. And they said, that's that thing at the foot of Mount Sinai. And we talked about this, where Moses took the hyssop, that branch, and he dipped it in blood, and he sprinkled it on the people, thus conferring the covenant. Yeah, you will be our God and we will be your people. In other words, we willingly commit to living the way you want us to live. So it was a voluntary thing, right? So it's not like God said, you people over there, stop wearing linen. It's like, look, I'm going to be your God, and I'm going to affect everything you do, and every aspect of your life is going to be mine. If you want in, if not, you can go be a pagan, right? And people could walk away. But if you want in, then you can be in. And this is what it is. I'm going to be Lord over everything, because I am Lord over everything. And you can willingly submit to that, or you can walk away, right? So it was a willing thing. And I think that's also important to understand, that this was participation in God's lordship. Not that I'm trying to say that he's not Lord if we don't participate. He is Lord. It's just like we can rebel. So it's like, you want to be a rebel or you want in? And we also talked about this before. Someone might say, okay, fine. Then the original people did this. But what about the kids, and their kids' kids? Well, that is what bar mitzvah is. That is, or as some people do, the confirmation. Basically, at a certain age, each child individually says, yes, I will adopt this as my identity, and I will submit to God as Lord over everything, and I'm going to be part of this people, or not. So it's always a willing thing. It's like, as weird as they may sound, there's an option. You can be part of this or not. Now that doesn't explain why these laws are there, but again, we're kind of building framework for that. Okay, so what about some of these laws? Is there anything that seems to be a common thread through these laws, as far as like food, dietary, clothing, stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have a indication of some kind of separation here, a separating this from that, clean, unclean.
It's very much a differentiating. I'm choosing these kinds, not those kinds.
Yeah.
When the dietary law, they chose a very specific kind of animal that they would be able to eat and sacrifice. A very specific kinds of anything outside of those specific kinds was excluded. And you can actually see that in the Christian worldview and the Christian theology, is that there is a very strict chosen group of people, and outside of that are those who are rejected.
Yeah, matter of fact, that's a great point, Pete, and I want to come back to that. I think towards the end, I got a question for that. So hang on to that, because we're gonna hopefully double tap that. All right, now you said separation, right, Caleb? So that's very interesting, because we always say that God is holy, God is holy, God is holy, 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 holy is the Lord Almighty. What does that mean? Especially in the Hebrew, that word holy has a specific meaning, and it is set apart.
Yep.
Set apart. So that's interesting, and maybe some people don't know that, but it's a very interesting thing. So when we say that God is holy, I mean, there's kind of like an intuitive understanding, like holy, but if you ask yourself, like, I gave you the definition, but above that, it's like, what does that even mean, that he is holy? Oh, he's super righteous. Well, kind of, but no, it means he's set apart. He's different than. Different than what? What is God different than? Anybody?
Different than us.
Yeah, different than everything. There isn't anything that God is like. He is separate from everything. That doesn't mean separated from everything. It means separate. It means different than. So, if you are the nation of Israel, and you are to be a chosen people, a holy priesthood of people, a people that is a holy priesthood of people, like, by definition, what does that mean? It means you're a people that has been
set apart.
Set apart. All right. Now, and remember, that's a voluntary thing. Like, okay, it's a humble thing. I think taken right now, certainly you can take that the wrong way, and you could develop some misplaced pride from that, and it would be absolutely misplaced, because God makes it very clear that he did not choose Israel because of anything in them. Matter of fact, it was just the opposite. It was because you were kind of small and weakly. That's why he chose you, right? I chose you so that you knew it wasn't you for the reason that I chose you. It's like, you're not going to make any mistake. I didn't choose Egypt. I didn't choose Babylon. I chose you guys. You little people down here. I chose you. And I'm taking you, and you're going to be my people. I, the Lord, am holy, set apart. And so as you're going to be my people and you will be set apart, I need you to be set apart. And by definition, that means not mixed in. Not mixed in. Now, it would be easy, and I think not just for us now, but even for the people then, to again take pride and take that as some sort of racist motivation or something like that. But God also makes it very clear that that is not the case, right? These people were actually supposed to be a light unto the Gentiles. They're supposed to be a light. They were set apart so that people could have a visible representation of what a holy people were going to be like, a people that took their identity solely from God. Like, what's your identity? It's like God. Our identity is in God, and we are set apart. He is set apart, and we've been set apart, and he's still set apart from us, but we're set apart from other nations. We're not going to be mixed in, so we're all there.
And it's interesting, just on a side note, when you see interactions between Israel and non-Israel people groups, you see a lot of references to the God of Israel. So when they're addressing something that's occurred because of God, these other people groups will come to believe in the God of Israel, or they will profess belief in the God of Israel because they don't see it as a fully distinct thing, because they are his people, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, God makes it very clear that there is one God, and there's not many gods. There's not many ways to God. There is one God, and there's one way to God. And he decides what that way is. And so these other religions that are worshiping idols, which are no gods at all, like, that's bad for them. It's not just another way, like, oh, you guys are, worshiping Kronos or whatever and sacrifice your kids. Like, that's cool. I'm going to be over here with the Israels, and we're going to do our thing. You do your thing. And like, everyone's going to be fine. No, everyone's not going to be fine. There is one God. He is to be worshiped and set apart. If you're not doing that, you are wrong in very drastic, with huge repercussions. So I'm going to put a people that is set apart so other people can see them and join. And they were encouraged to do so, right? To light unto the Gentiles. Okay, so they're his chosen people that are to be set apart. And so now, okay, fine. So that's the purpose. Now, in what aspect are they to be set apart? And the answer is back to our triangle. In every aspect. Like, theologically, of course, there's one God. That's pretty unique, because the God of the Old Testament is drastically, revolutionarily different than any other God at that time, or since, really. Economic, that was drastically different, and social. So this whole thing, like, in every kind of aspect of life, we are the chosen people to be set apart and act as such. So theological, economical, and social. Now, we all have kids, right? I got kids. My kids are grown, but you guys still have active youngins running around the house.
Yes, still running around the house.
Is it still the case? I know when I was raising kids, I just had to tell my kids once, and they always remember to do everything I told them. Is that still a way?
Never have a single moment of disobedience at all, he said sarcastically.
Yeah. No. Okay. Right. And sometimes there is certainly disobedience, but sometimes they just forget. You know what? I wasn't going to bring this up, but when I was young, my poor parents, I think back now when I was, now that I'm an adult and think back to when I was a kid, I used to lose jackets. For some reason, I couldn't hang on to a jacket. I'd go to school, it'd be cold, it'd be winter, and so I'd have a jacket. I'd wear my jacket to school, and I'd like forget it there. I'd forget it I didn't try. Matter of fact, they'd get upset. I didn't want to lose a jacket. I like to be warm, but maybe I played around, and then I get hot, and I just forget my jacket, and then I go into the class, whatever, jackets. But the thing about it was, you can't let your kid go without a jacket. So they kept having to buy me more jackets. So I was just constantly losing jackets. They would.
That explains how all those jackets are always in the lost and found of places. They're all yours.
Yeah, they may be. I'm going to go redeem them. I like so much, but the jackets did get cheaper. they weren't as nice as I went on. At first it was like, oh, it's a nice jacket. First, remember your first day of school shopping, you get your nice clothes. You'd be like, style. Okay, I got my new shoes. I got my first day of school outfit. I got my nice jacket. Gone. Like, second day of school, no jacket. It's like the sweatshirt. Anyway, wow, that was a digression.
Fairly fun one, though.
Yeah, all right. So good parents give their children ways to remember, right? So we're teaching them, and so we want to help them remember. That's what a good parent does. Just say, you tell them once, and then, you spank them with an axe the first time they forget. right? You help them. You want to raise them up. You want to change them, right? And so in doing that, you need to help them remember who they are and what they're supposed to be doing, right? A good parent gives good reminders. Now that is especially, it's striking to think about how often the command to remember is given in both the Old and New Testament. It's like, remember. God is constantly telling his people, remember, remember, remember who I am. Remember what I did for you. Remember, remember, remember. I mean, people would build like, the Ebenezer as a rock. They put up a rock as a reminder. They build altars as reminders, structures. There were celebrations, festivals, common prayers, psalms, songs that people would sing together, right, as reminders of what God has done and who he is, and laws. The laws themselves were these reminders. And the thing about a law, it's like you can sing a song and you can do that in a community. Maybe it's, time to sing psalms. It's time to do this. But laws, like, they affect your daily life. Like things that, like how you cut your hair, the clothes you wear, those are daily, hourly things that are constant reminders of who you are and that you are set apart. Set apart. It's like in everything. Remember, don't ever forget that you are set apart. It's not a pride thing, right? It's don't get watered down. Our calling as a people is to be a holy nation. You could just picture ancient Hebrew life, and maybe you have like baby little Martha or whatever, a little girl is, she's growing up, and mom sees her walking out to the door. You got linen with cotton? You can't, don't mix that. You can't mix that. Get back in here. Take that off. And mama, why can't we just wear this? It's like, and then it's this opportunity because we are a people who are set apart. We do this in our daily rituals and our daily laws to never forget. Our calling as a people is to be a holy nation. We are set apart. We are not to be watered down. We are not to be syncretistic. We are not to fade to gray. We do this because we need the reminders.
So you know how there's some people when they eat food, they will take their plate, and regardless of how many things are there, they'll mix them all together. Other people, they literally separate each thing into a category. You even have people who they'll separate each item. They will eat one bite of a thing. They will fully eat that, swallow it, and then they'll go to the next item, and then they'll go in a circle. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In reality, what they're doing is they're setting each item apart. Mm-hmm. They're really making, and not to use the word segregation, in the negative thought process, but they're segregating things so that they can have that specific item in its purity. And in a way, that's one of the things that God was doing here. Is he's saying, look, when you come to me, you come to me set apart, and you enjoy me in, theoretically, if this is done correctly, you enjoy me in the purity and the wholeness of me without any taint or mixing of other foreign entities, foreign input.
I remember reading the testimony of Anne Rice when she, of course, she was an atheist for a long time. I don't actually know what her current state is. I think she was having some second thoughts, but nevertheless, during reading her testimony, one of the things she said is, as she was reviewing the history of the Jewish nation, she was struck as a historian as to how this people group lasted for so long. Thousands of years. You have people groups that come and go, and they're here, they're not here, they're merged, and you got a people group, the Jewish nation, who is, forced, taken into captivity. They're there, but their identity as Israelites, as Jews, sustains to this day. That's remarkable. It's it's absolutely remarkable. Even possibly miraculous is to have a people group who still today identify with this same old covenant. Now, I don't believe the old covenant is still in practice, but nevertheless, this idea that we will not merge with other cultures and fade away, because that's exactly what will happen. If you're God and you want your people to not fade away, you got to make sure that they don't fade away. You have to have these. I need this. This is why we need the church. This is why we need brothers and sisters in Christ. Like, don't fade. Why do you got to tell your brothers and sisters that? Why do you guys have to tell me that? Because the world is constantly at the front door insisting, absolutely insisting that you merge, that you water down, that you become syncretistic with your beliefs and just merge. That's like, no, we will not do that. We will be humble. We don't think we're better, but we will not sacrifice who our identity is. We will not do that. And every little tiny reminder that we can have is whatever it is. If it's a little bracelet on your, what do they call those? Phylacteries, little, Bible verses or tassels, whatever it is, like anything, everything that you could possibly do. This is an absolutely loving act by the Creator. It says, I'm going to give you so many reminders you can't ever possibly forget that you are a people set apart. You're going to do it in your rising up, in your walking down the road, and in your laying down. You will pray these prayers. You will have this book of Psalms. You will act like this. You will dress like this. You will sacrifice like this, and you will understand who I am and not who I am not. So, are these laws weird? Yeah, some of them are. That doesn't mean they're not without a purpose. That doesn't mean they are without a purpose.
Yeah. So I posted over in our in our comments. I said, you don't put ice in a soda. I remember when I was younger, ice inside of any drink, inside of any soda, inside of sweet tea. You didn't want it there because over time you wouldn't have sweet tea. You would have tea flavored water. Mm-hmm. And ultimately that's what God's saying with this separation of his people, with this distinct differentiation, is that not only am I making you different, but I'm making it so that these should be hallmarks of who you are. Mm-hmm. They should be the landmarks in your ideological world, in your practical world, that it demonstrates this is what makes you different. This is what makes you pure. And don't accept things from outside influences, because ultimately it will start to pollute. It'll start to water down what you are, who you are. And you may start to accept some of those other things, some of the other more, again, we would look at the different types of fabric inside of clothing and go, it doesn't impact my relationship with God. But what he was trying to do is say, in these walls, we behave the same. We are the same.
Yeah, and not that they're robots, because certainly there were individual personalities and traits and jobs and this and that. What we're saying is, don't forget your identity, right? Your identity is something that is set apart. You are a people, because we got to go back to the triangle. It's like, you think you can do this thing over here economically? You think you can change that and not affect your relationship to God? You can't. You can't do that, right? It's going to affect. The question is how, right? So it has to be in every aspect. And walking away from this chapter, one of the things that I thought is that once you get past the idea that God is just being weird and arbitrary, a deep sense that this is a loving God who is sheltering his people from a world that wants to destroy them. And worshiping idols is destruction. It's destruction, right? And not a temporary one, right? A potentially permanent and horrible destruction. Like God says, no. You will be right here, right? And I'm going to lovingly make you do something. And that's what that's what we do as parents. We lovingly make our children remember certain things that are important. It doesn't mean we're making them robots, that we're taking over every single aspect of every choice they make. It's like, we're going to give you constant reminders so you can make healthy decisions and remember who you are. I mean, Mike, I'm sure every parent has heard this before, and certainly I did, when your kids go, yeah, but Susie is doing the thing. And I would just tell my kids, I would say, I'm not raising you to be like other kids. I just tell them that. Like, that was my response. I'm not raising you to be like other kids. That's not my intent. I'm raising you to be different. I'm just telling you straight up. And it's interesting because they didn't really fight that. Once I told them that, they'd be like, okay, not that they were happy, but they seemed to accept that standard. Like, I'm not raising you to be like everyone else. God was not raising, and that's what he was doing. We talked about these laws being temporary, and they were, right? God was raising up a nation and making sure that they grew in health and in theology through the other aspects of their life, that they grew and matured and not faded away into destruction. Because, man, if I know anything about myself, like, Lord, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the Lord I love. Prone. So it's who I am. So, gosh, the more reminders, it's like not a bad idea. I don't do it as much as I should, but I love going to other Christians' house, and they got, if they're the kind of house that has, the little pictures is, like a little prayer excerpt. I just love that. They're just little things, and they, it's like any picture you have in your house, you tend to kind of disregard it because you've seen it so many times. But I love going in there. It's like, oh, there's a reminder there. There's a reminder there. There's a reminder there. It's like all around, just surrounding ourselves with these reminders of who we are. I love that. Super healthy. All right. Thoughts before we move on? Okay, good.
One quick thing. There's a meme that where it's the one girl pointing and screaming, and it's the white cat sitting in the chair, and people will put somebody screaming at one person, and then the cat says something sarcastic back, and it's almost like people were looking at the land of Israel and saying, if you obey these laws, if you do these things, if you actually, and even God was saying this to them, if you do these things, you won't fit in with the nations around you.
Right, that's correct. You
and
certainly won't.
And the cat, being God in this case, also would be like, that's the point.
Yeah, right. What? I want you to merge and go sacrifice your children and to the God of Kronos to burn them alive. Like, yeah, you're not going to be like them, but you will. If I don't stop you, you absolutely will. And they did. Gosh, I'm reading through 2 Kings right now, and it's just horribly heartbreaking. Every time, I don't read the Old Testament enough to where I can remember exactly which king does, right in the eyes of the Lord or does evil in the eyes of the Lord. So every time I open up a new chapter, it's like, okay, and then there was Ahaz, and it's like, and Ahaz did, and it's like, drum roll, it's like, did evil in the sight of the Lord. He's like, again, it's like, man, he just came after, like this guy who did good and tore down all the high places. And then like his son puts them all back up again. Like one generation it took, and they just went to pot. This is horrible. It's like, you don't think that can happen in a heartbeat? It did happen to them. But there was always a remnant. There was always a remnant. Why? Because there were constant reminders, at least some. Even it's like, gosh, if you don't think all these laws were necessary, right? You just read like a few chapters in a row of the Old Testament, say, even with all these reminders, they still strayed. But there was always a remnant. There was enough to always keep a remnant, which was the plan. And as we said, it certainly worked. It's still working today. There are still Orthodox Jews today. So it works, and it's healthy. Okay, so I want to talk about the idea of clean and unclean. So what do we mean by clean and unclean, and what don't we mean? I'm not helping you guys on this one. Right?
All
You,
right,
you understand
well-
what I'm saying about the clean and the unclean thing, right?
Right. So clean are those things that can be brought before the presence of God. So they are things that are set apart, if you will. So you clean things can be in the presence of God, given his set apartness, while unclean things are not able to be within or representative of him in those same ways.
Right. And there were things that that I could do, or even things that I could merely touch, which would make me unclean. Right.
And it didn't always mean those things were wrong.
Right. Or
But-
correct. Correct. But go ahead.
they still would be something that would separate you from God, whether it be temporary or long term, until the sacrifice has been made, etc.
Yeah. Right. So one of the things that struck me, and I hadn't heard this before, gosh, it made so much sense to me. Just one of so there was many things that could make you clean or unclean, but one of the things that was interesting is, again, they're not necessarily, if you did something immoral, that could certainly make you unclean, but there were things you could do that were very moral, like washing, getting a body ready for burial, like a dead body. If you touched a dead body, that made you unclean. Not immoral. That, matter of fact, you were supposed to do that. It just mean that after touching a dead body, you had to go through certain purity rites. Right. In other words, if you were involved with the dead, there had to be something that was done on your behalf to make you clean again. That's super interesting. But so it wasn't necessarily immoral, but there were things that couldn't be involved with, again, God resided in the temple at that time. And so you couldn't bring these unclean things. Now, one of those things that I thought was really super interesting was sex. I thought that was really interesting. And the reason I thought that was so interesting is because certainly sex is a very healthy thing inside of marriage. I mean, it's very clear that that's a blessing from the Lord inside of marriage. It's a gift given to us in the right context, in the appropriate context,
Even given as a command.
Yeah, right. And there's a whole book, Song of Songs. All right, like what's that book about? Like the Orthodox, I think for a while, like you weren't allowed to read that until you were like 13 in the Orthodox faith. So you can kind of get it. But the point is, it's not immoral. It's just that was something that made you unclean. And I thought, man, that is so insightful, because if you look at the cultures around them and the religions around them, how often did they, if not even at first, but then eventually somehow try to involve sex in their worship of God? And God says, look, go do that. It's a blessing. Don't ever bring that into my house. Like, you do that in your house, you're not bringing that in here, man. That's your private time's your private time. Like, do it, be blessed by it. It's not worship. All right, you can thank God for it, but that is not part of that's not the sacrifice. That's not nothing. Like, you keep that at home. I thought, man, because so many religions were just doing like all the way into the New Testament, and the temples and of the Greeks and the Romans.
I mean, that's really important to have that distinction there in that particular case, because the other metaphor and example are given throughout the Bible as an example of this relationship between God and his people is one of a marriage. So to keep the marital relationship and the sexual aspect of that separate distinguishes. It says, hey, yes, this is an example of how I relate to you as a people. This is a comparison that you can relate to. Yeah. But at the same time, your relationships with each other, while important, it is not this.
You're not going to have temple prostitutes. The Levites are not going to be involved in any type of that. It's like, nope.
Right.
I thought that was just totally healthy. The other thing that was interesting about the clean and the unclean things was the clean and the unclean, not always, but often, and this is where I want to pick up on what you touched on, Pete, earlier, often revolved around things that blurred margins. It's like, like kosher foods is like, look at, if it's a land animal and it's like only a land animal, you can eat it. It's got to be really a land animal though. It's like, landish, very, very super landish. Like you can't eat a beaver. Right? They're playing this like, it's not that beavers were in themselves like unhealthy or necessarily immoral. It's just like, look at this again. We're back to the idea of I don't want you to fade to gray, right? So just be reminded that the things you eat are set apart by their own identity, like they're land animals. And you can eat fish. Eat some fish. Lobsters, they're kind of like, they're like fish that have legs. So no, they blur margins. Like don't do that, right? You can maybe you can eat a bird, but not a penguin, right? The things in life that blur were to be avoided because we need reminders that we should not do things in our triangle that blur those margins, right? It's like our social life is instructed to be a certain way. We're not going to blur that economic, and certainly because anytime we blur those, we're going to start blurring the theological stuff. There will be no blurring there. Okay, so to you, Pete, I want to hear what you think about this. I don't know that this is true, but I heard it as a conjecture even when I heard it, that one possible, not the only, certainly not the only, but one of the possible reasons that the Israelites had these laws, and if you read them, they're very interesting because a lot of the laws, especially like the dietary laws, will say you can do this, but not this. You can do this, but not this. Like this, but not this. This, but not this. So there's like a pro and a con. This, but not this. Right? Is to give as part of the mental thought process the logic. I don't want to say this. The background for logic itself, right? This equals this, but this does not equal this, right? And that may seem like very common sense until you look at some of the Eastern religions who have what has been termed as the kind of the both and. It's like, it's this and it's this. Like, God and people, they're kind of the same thing. They're this and this. And the idea of logic there really kind of gets blurred. And so you have this like right built in, this either or. It's not both and, it's either or. It's this, not this. So thoughts on that?
So I like how you stated there's the intentionality of not blurring, not making things that there are times where there really is a dichotomy. There's this or there's that. When God created these laws, it was this separating out and the claim of mine. There's a place in Scripture where God is called Jehovah Nisi, the God our banner. And if you think about God our banner, think about a banner being a flag. Is pretty much what we're calling that. What we're talking about is a banner. One of the most popular, one of the most famous statues you'll ever see is the Iwo Jima Memorial, where these U.S. military people are raising up this flag to lay claim that they've won Iwo Jima, and in a way, these laws are almost like a laying claim that I'm setting my boundaries, and inside these boundaries are mine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, granted, in reality, everything belongs to God, but in what he's kind of doing is saying, but here are the demarcations of mine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's very clear boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's very clear boundaries, there's also very clear claim. There's a very clear distinction, and in that mineness that God is putting on his people, because there is a mine, there's a defined mine. There's also a defined not mine,
Mm-hmm.
not belonging to me, not in right relationship with me.
Mm-hmm.
So now, granted, as we talk about the New Testament, we talk about the doctrines of grace, like Charles, you and I are studying on Sunday. The mindness has nothing to do with what I do. It has everything to do with what God does. But at the same time, that mindness has its very, and I coined the word mindness, but that mind aspect of our faith, of our behavior, is God defined. It's creating that, not just a thin line of, it's a very clear, very bold, very easy to see demarcation. In the Old
Yes,
Testament,
very easy to see. That's correct.
Right. And in that very easy to see, it becomes one of these things where it's almost like I don't have the ability to skate a line and to kind of get the best of both worlds.
Uh-huh.
And in reality, you don't want the best of both worlds, because anything other than God alone is the worst. And you're literally saying, when we're saying I'm going to define my life and my relationship with God by these principles, or by these very clear points of demarcation, I'm defining and making it very clear that I will differentiate myself from the rest of the world. It becomes very uncomfortable, but it becomes very rewarding ultimately.
Yeah, and one of the things that's a great point. One of the things I wanted to, as I was, hold on, I gotta escort my dog. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was reading through this is, okay, so God sets apart a people, and then he puts these laws in place to remind them of who they are. It could be easily thought that God is some weird tyrant who's like trying to be, well, as some might put it, who just needs these people to constantly worship him. And that is not the case at all. God doesn't need anybody to worship him, right? God doesn't need anyone to constantly tell him how good and how holy and how awesome he is. He doesn't need that at all, right? We need that. We need that. It is when you really take a deep and honest look about the nature of reality and the nature of the Christian religion, the most kind and loving thing that God can do is tell us how good he is. It sounds weird. It's not for his sake, it's for ours, because he is absolutely the definition of goodness, and he is the absolute definition of morality. And the better we know that and understand that and react and respond and live according to it, the better off we are, like now and forever. It's like it's a kindness to do that. So he doesn't need it. We need it. We definitely need the constant reminders. And it's again, as I'm reading through this chapter, I think the main takeaway is this was a very loving act of a concerned parent who's concerned about the welfare and appropriate raising of his child. So that's all I've really prepared for. There's certainly a lot more for our listeners if they want to go in and read the chapter. We didn't cover all of it by any means. There's a lot of depth and even topics we didn't talk about there. So I'll let you guys have the last words, closing thoughts.
I'll I'll take first stab at that. The uncomfortable thing, and it's strangely, I think it's becoming far more likely that the people of God, the people of Christ in 21st century America are going to have a very clear line of demarcation that is going to say, this is going to separate us from the world. It's going to start coming with a much higher cost. You know, in the past, you could say, hey, I'm a Christian, and people would just go, okay, cool. Nowadays, when you say I'm a Christian, they're going to start asking you very specific and pointed questions.
Why are you such a bigot?
Yeah, why do you think this? And they're not going to, well, some people will come at you with questions of what do you think about XYZ, and they'll ask, you know, and granted, we're still going to, those who are going to stay true to what Scripture says is sin, but still there is grace. They're going to mark out that territory very clearly and say, this is what I believe is true. This is what is true based on Scripture. And I'm going to live by that. And I'm going to honor that. And I'm going to believe that. And I'm going to say that out loud and state that as truth. And that's going to start coming with higher and higher costs. Other folks are going to come at you with an absolute claim. And some of it's going to be a straw man, you know, well, because you're a Christian, you believe X, Y, Z, and then they're going to put those words in your mouth. And then you're going to have to, in some cases, say, no, here's what I actually believe. And it's in their eyes or ears, it's going to come across as just as wrong and just as horrible. And like I said, the claim of Christianity is going to have a higher and higher and higher cost.
And it may even be death.
Yeah.
This is kind of a different note, but in regards to the chapter, another important note I think it made is that, you know, we have this instance of a theocracy for a specific time. So a theocracy is God ruling a people. So a lot of Christians, I think, take that and kind of carry that over and even consider what we're living in now to be a theocracy in some sense. However, this was for specific people group at a specific time. Christianity has taken that and that theocracy is moved internal, if you will. So that God rules your individual life, even though it's not a governance of a whole people. His people is now individually saved and directed, if you will, through what he's already provided us. So I think that's an important distinction as well, is that we shouldn't expect, and this kind of goes along with what Pete was saying, we shouldn't expect the government to act in such a way right. that is in line with what we would expect for either ancient Israel or for modern Christians today. That's not something we can expect to be the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't be voting for any law to bring back, you know, some of these dietary laws. The moral laws, we talked about this, the moral laws still stand as moral standards, but the other ones, they're reminders. And you're right, Caleb, this is supposed to be on our hearts now. God said, look, it's for a time. There's going to be a time in the future, he said, and the time is now, where I'm going to write this on their hearts. But, you know, still, if anything, so, you know, the scripture never returns void. So, and I think we can still learn a lot from these Old Testaments. And again, we as human beings are no better human beings than the ancient Israelites, are just as human, just as fallible, just as stiff-necked. So we need reminders. Now, what the form of those reminders, we're not under theocracy anymore, so there's no laws, but that doesn't mean we don't need the reminders. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have things and an understanding that the things we do in every corner of our life affect the other corners. Pete, shout out to your wife. You made a point that there's coming a time where the lines are being drawn. And just a shout out to your wife, she recommended that book, Fault Lines, to me, and that has just been a wonderful book. I've recommended it to a couple other people. Great book. If no one else, or if other people haven't heard it yet, it's Voddie Baucham, wonderful book, and it talks just about what you were saying, which is, and he even says in that book, look, you're not going to stop it. The fault line is coming. You're just going to have to decide which side of the fault line you're going to be on. You're not going to stop it. It is coming. There is going to be a divergence of the culture. Can't stop it. Where are you going to stand?
In that book, which I will admit my wife has read, you have read at least. I have not yet. But
I read it twice.
I love the fact that when my wife goes through a book, I get a book report.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
So it's like I kind of get the Cliff's Notes of, but with the things that are stated in that book, we're talking about the current, and he uses the metaphor of fault lines. We're seeing the fissures that have been in our society for the longest time have become far more pronounced, and there is a very strong faith, God present point of demarcation on all of those. If you believe X, then you're on this side of the battle. If you're on the other side, you're not. But with that said, it's kind of like we're having our own modern day law that's being laid down upon us, and we're actually saying, I have to figure out which side of this line I'm on, and I want to be on the side that really does put God's mark on me.
I don't see any comments from questions in the comments. So,
all right. Well, I guess with that, we will leave it at that and wrap up for tonight. We tried a different time tonight. We pushed things back a little bit later in the evening. So let us know about the time change, what you think. We may try a couple others. So the only way to find out exactly when we're going to be going live again, subscribe. Hit that notification bell.
Why wouldn't you do it? It's free.
Exactly.
We don't charge you.
You don't have to watch, but then you'll at least know when we're up.
Just gotta. That's it right there. Just click.
Yep.
Right down here. Subscribe. Hit the notification bell.
Yeah.
Make comments. Because that's one way we actually learn about topics that we can cover. It doesn't necessarily have to be a question. It could literally be a comment. Like my daughter is spelunking me with a request for more time on YouTube, probably because she wants to watch us.
Probably not.
Hey, nice try there.
She doesn't want to watch some old dudes.
I like that.
She's watching Mr. Beast or something like that.
All right. Thank you, Caleb. Thanks for organizing.
Thank you, Charles. Thanks, Pete. Y'all have a wonderful evening, and hope everybody else does as well.
All right. See you, everyone.